Okay, so today's notes are notes 3.1, talking about domain and range. So we're just going to recap quickly from yesterday. And you're going to need two different colors. I'm going to be using purple and green. So right now, what I write in black is what you would write with your pencil. So closed brackets are the square brackets. And we use these when we see a closed dot or when we see that the graph is part of the line or part of like the curve that's drawn on your graph. An open bracket looks like parentheses, or they are circled or rounded, I think is what I said. And we use open brackets when we see open dots or when we see arrows. And remember that arrows mean infinity, right? And the infinity symbol is like the sideways 8. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna draw a rectangle around the graph to help us easily identify left and right, top to bottom. So in the left, I'm gonna do purple. And if something's going left to right, that means we're going to be using the x-axis because the x-axis goes left to right. So we're using the x-axis numbers. For bottom to top, I'll do in green, and that means we'll be using the y-axis numbers, right? Because the y-axis go up and down. So let's look at number 1. So the leftist side of my graph is a -4. And that -4 has a closed dot, so I'm going to use a closed bracket. So we have an arrow on the right, and if it's an arrow on the right, that means it's a right arrow. So that means it's a positive infinity, okay? Looking at the bottom, so at the bottomest part of this drawn graph is a -2. And we see a closed dot there, so that's how I know to use a closed bracket. At the very top of this graph, we have an arrow, and that arrow's on top, so that's an up arrow, which also means it's positive. If you go up in math, that's positive. Okay, so again, arrows have 2 directions. So let's write that to ourselves. Arrows can have 2 directions. They're either going up or down or left and right, okay? So either up or down, not both, just one of those. Either left or right, not both, one of those, okay? All right, number 2, the leftist side of our graph, so using that x-axis, it's a -4, and we have an open bracket because we see an open dot. The rightist side on our x-axis is a 5, and it's a closed bracket because we see a closed dot. The bottom, again, we use the y-axis, so the bottomest part of our graph is a -3, and that's going to be a closed bracket because it's part of the line, right? The line comes down, stops, turns around, and keeps going. So it's still part of the line, okay? The top of my graph here, the toppest part, is at 5, where we see a closed dot, so we use a closed bracket. Number 3 is kind of crazy. So left to right, so that means we're using the x-axis. So the leftist side, we see an arrow, and if it's an arrow on the left, so if it's a left arrow, that means it's a negative infinity. Close the bracket. Okay, so I'm going to even write left here. On the rightist side, we see an arrow again, so that means it's a right arrow, which means it's a positive infinity, right? At the bottom, we're using the y-axis. So bottom, at the bottomest part of our graph, we see an arrow, and it's a down arrow since it's at the bottom. And if it's a down arrow, that means it's negative infinity. The top, we see the arrow going up, so we have an up arrow, which makes it a positive infinity. So I'm going to talk about these arrows real quick. See how this arrow is not only going to the left, but it's also going up? So that left made it negative infinity when we talked left to right, but because it was also going up, that's where it became a positive infinity when we were going bottom to top, okay? Same thing with down and right. All right, so number 4, going left to right. So the leftist side is a -4. It's a closed bracket because it's a closed dot. And it goes all the way to 3 on the right side, which is an open bracket because it's an open dot. The bottom is a -3, and that's an open bracket because we have an open dot. And then on the top, we have 4, and that's going to be a closed bracket because it's a closed dot. So I want you guys to try 5 and 6, but just please note that 6, this is an open dot, okay? So try 5 and 6. Okay, so here are the answers for 5 and 6. So 5, the left to right is negative infinity because we have an arrow going to the left, and then it stops here at 5. The bottom to top, the bottom is that -3 with a closed bracket, so we have a closed dot there, and then we have an arrow that goes up, so we have a positive infinity. For number 6, left to right, left we have an arrow going to the left, and it goes all the way to the right at 4 with an open dot. Bottom to top, at the bottom we have an arrow, and that's going down as well. At top we have at 4 with an open dot. So let's look at domain and range. So domain is the leftist to the rightist, which is what we've been doing, but now we have a name for it, using x-axis numbers, versus the range, which is the bottomist to the toppist, using y-axis numbers. Okay, so just like before. So domain means the same thing as saying left to right. So we're using those x-axis numbers. So the leftist, -4, closed bracket because it's a closed dot. Right side, we have an arrow. Arrows going to the right are positive. The range is going to be your bottom to top using your y's. So at the bottom we have a -3, closed bracket because it's a closed dot. And at the top we have an arrow. Arrows going at the top are positive infinities. Number 2, the leftist side for the domain, because domain's left to right, is a -4 with an open bracket. On the right we have an infinity, and since it's on the right it's positive, open bracket. The range, the bottomist, is a infinity, and since it's on the bottom it's negative. Up top we have 1 with an open dot, so we use an open bracket. We're going to skip down to number 5 here. Skip to number 5. We're going to go left to right for the domain. The leftist side is a -3, and it's a closed bracket because it's part of the line. The right side is a 4, but we have to be careful. There's a closed dot and an open dot. So what I want you to write here is that closed dots beat open dots. So if a closed dot beats an open dot, that means we're going to use a closed bracket. The range, the bottomist, is a -5, and we have that closed dot there. Up top, we have a 3 with an open dot, so we use an open bracket. I want you guys to try 3, 4, and 6 on your own and see if you get the same thing. All right, so here are the answers for 3, 4, and 6. So domain, left to right. Left is that -4, closed dot, closed bracket. Right is 2, open dot, open bracket. Range is bottom to top. Bottom we have a -3 with a closed dot, so we use a closed bracket. Up top we have a 4, open dot, open bracket. Number 4, domain. -4 on the left side. It's a closed dot, closed bracket. Right side we have arrow, so it's a positive infinity because it's going to the right. Range at the bottom, so at the bottom it's a negative infinity because it's the arrow is going down. And then up top we have a 3 with a closed bracket. Number 6, we have the domain starting with negative infinity because that's what's on the left. And then on the right we have a 4 with an open dot, so open bracket. Bottom we have a -3, which is part of the line, so that's why we have a square bracket. Up top we have an arrow, and remember now that arrow is going up, so we have a positive infinity. All right, so I want you guys to do your homework. It's the exact same thing, but it's saying domain and range. So remember, domain is left to right, range is bottom to top. Have a good one.